Storms in Nashville today, high of 60.
Hey, it's Josh Smith at Ocean Way Nashville Studios, and you're listening to the It's Gonna Be Great podcast.
Welcome to episode 6 of the It's Gonna Be Great podcast. In this week's episode, our guest is Josh Smith. In this installment, we discuss Josh's career as an artist, touring musician, and music producer. Josh is currently the musical director for Joe Bonamassa, and I had the chance to catch up with him after one of his sessions here at Ocean Way.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm at the beginning of a long stretch of travel, so kind of excited about that, but also slightly stressed and anxious, as it's been 2 years, obviously, since I've traveled extensively. So looking forward to it, but also a little
When was the
nervous.
last concert date that you did?
I've been doing some shows in LA now where I live, and I've done a couple little one-offs where I've flown. And obviously I've flown a decent amount for record projects. I come here a bunch of times
Right.
and a couple other places. But to go, get on a bus or in a van and fly 5 days in a row and all that travel, this will be a couple years since I've done that. So
during COVID, you've obviously started producing records with Joe Bonamassa, but you're also producing other artists as well. Were you doing that before COVID, or did that kind of start because of COVID?
producing? Oh no, I've been doing that well before COVID. I guess I started producing with Joe whenever we did the first one we did was Reese, so that was 4 years ago or so. I've been producing records maybe 6-7 years. I mean, not counting my own. So I mean, like for other artists, probably 6-7 years. It was never like a planned thing. It kind of just happened. Once I built my studio, people started asking, and quickly I kind of realized how much I really, really like doing it. It's really enjoyable. So I've kind of really leaned into it, and I'm the kind of guy with anything I do. Part of the reason I do it and the fun for me is trying to get as good as I can at that thing.
Right.
So I really am enjoying growing with every project and becoming a better producer, a better music arranger, all that stuff.
So right now, is the first love still going out and performing and playing guitar, or do you see yourself being a producer more, or what's the balance?
No, playing is the first love for sure, without question. I can't consider myself, I identify as a guitar player. That's what I am. That's who I am. And even more than that, I'm an improviser. Like that's in my heart what I want to be doing all the time. I want to be thrust on stage and somebody point at me and go, play something. That's where I live for, is that creative moment where I'm, pulling something out of the air and playing it. If I had my druthers, I would do that all the time. That being said, I love producing the records. So pretty much it's my second, if I'm going to do anything else, that's my second choice of things to do. And it's starting to kind of split my year between producing records and then doing my own stuff.
How did you start, or how did it come about where you and Joe started working together?
Okay, so I've known Joe a long time, but I wouldn't say we really became like real friends until about 10 years ago. We both live in LA, and we swim in same circles. Before Joe blew up to the extent he is now, we were really in the same circles a lot. We're both really, same age basically. He's a couple years older than me. Both been playing since we were really young. And so when you're that kid guitar player, you hear about the other kid guitar player. So he was one of the first ones I heard about when I was 10 and he was 12. So we would bump into each other, and we certainly knew about each other growing up for years and years. But then once he moved to LA and once I moved to LA, we became actual friends and started to hang. And when Reese asked Joe to produce his record, Joe came to me basically because he'd never produced a record before, and I had already started producing records a few years previous.
Gotcha.
And I'd actually been on a run of doing a bunch of them right around that time, and he knew that. We'd been talking about them and stuff. And he said, hey, Reese wants me to produce this album for him. He just said flat out, will you help me with it, so I don't make mistakes? Like, you can make sure I'm not leaving things unchecked that shouldn't be checked, and just cover all the bases. And of course, number one, I'd like obviously to work with my friend. Joe's my friend, so that was, I would do it no matter what. But then it's Reese. who's a hero. You know,
Right.
I mean, I grew up watching Reese my whole life, so the thought of being involved in that project was, of course, an automatic yes. And I think quickly Joe and I realized how well we would work together. And I think maybe we already knew this based on our friendship. We're pretty similar in that we're no-nonsense kind of guys. We just like to work really hard and get the job done as best as we can do it. And we kind of don't around. You know what I mean? So we work really good in that regard. And then once we get in the studio, we have slightly different demeanors. Joe is a good motivator of pulling things out of people and knowing how to push people's buttons, maybe sometimes to wind them up, you know, and I'm more soft-spoken. I'm the business guy. So a lot of times I'm taking care of writing the charts, arranging the tunes, organizing things. You know, like today we did strings and horns for a record that we're in the middle of producing. So I handled all that, you know, like contracting and hiring guys and setting up the sessions, getting with the arranger, telling him what I want, what parts, getting arrangements together. I love that stuff. I also have a lot more experience than Joe with actual just recording on my own, running Pro Tools and getting sounds. I'm comfortable enough as an engineer to mic a drum kit, get a sound, to run a session by myself, things like that. So we balance each other out really well. Joe's able to be almost 100% creative in the process, and I cross the T's and dot the I's. Not that I'm not creative also, but we just strike a good balance. But I think the biggest thing that's made it a success is we both really care a lot. We've gotten involved pretty much only with artists that we care about. And it's also just part of our personality that if we're going to do something, we're going to put as much effort as necessary into that to make it as great as it can be, because otherwise, what's the point? We really do care about the end result.
I do think you and Joe make a good team. And for those of you listening, if you don't know, there have been several records that Joe and Josh have worked on here at Ocean Way. The first one being Reese Winans.
Yep.
Joanna Connor.
Yep.
Eric Gales.
Yep.
Joanne Shaw Taylor.
Yep.
And then today you're actually in the studio doing some stuff for a new Larry McRae project.
Yep, and the Jimmy Hall record
Jimmy
as
Hall,
well.
yes.
Yeah, all recorded. Most of them recorded completely here, some partially.
Right.
And yeah. So we're building up quite a resume. We call it another BS production. Yeah.
So in my research, I did see or found out that you had a signature guitar coming out by Ibanez, or I guess it's just now coming into the market. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a dream come true to have a signature guitar with that large and iconic of a company.
Absolutely.
They approached me about 3, maybe even almost 4 years ago now. I've never had a signature guitar. I have some signature pedals. I have a signature amp. And I'm a gear fanatic. I like to know what goes into gear, why things sound a certain way, why things feel a certain way, why do I like this? I like to know all those things. So I'm slightly fanatical about details and those types of things. So when it came time to make this guitar, Ibanez, to their credit, truly let me run with the ball as far as I wanted to, and didn't deny any of the things that I wanted as far as making this guitar truly like my guitar, and I'm so proud of it. So they approached me about 4 years ago. They had just launched a line called the AZ line, which was kind of a higher end line for Ibanez. All their high end stuff is made in Japan, and this was like a slightly less, Ibanez, even though they have a long history of great jazz guitars and great guitars in general, they're known as a shredder guitar company. Right. Let's just admit that. So this AZ line, was kind of a little more, not vintage, but a little more modern in playability and in materials, a little higher end, and a little more well-rounded of a guitar. Not a super thin neck, more of a comfortable neck, not a shredder, And when they called me over to talk about this idea, they had the prototypes for those guitars because they were about to launch, and they handed me one, and it's more of a Strat style guitar, but I was floored by what you were getting for the price of this guitar, which, while expensive, was not anywhere near as expensive as some of the other guitars that it easily hangs with or stacked up to. So that immediately got me thinking, oh, this could be like legit, if they could make the guitar I want to make. They're going this way already. So then they pull up this presentation on computer of what they want to actually do with me. And they've got a rendering, just a drawing of a Mortelli style guitar, T-style guitar, which is what I play generally, which they've never made at all. And they said, hey, basically we want to do what we just did with the Strat style body, the AZ, for a T-style body. And we would like you to help us basically develop the line. So kind of help us know if we're barking up the wrong tree. So basically help with the regular models and then have a signature model as like the first signature model from the line. And so it was almost a no-brainer once they said that. It's a whole new model for them, something they've never made, and they let me do literally everything I want. So, win-win. So I couldn't be happier with the guitar. I'm 100% comfortable with it. I've been playing it full-time since January, and it's just now starting to arrive in stores. I've actually sold quite a bit in pre-order, much more than Ibanez thought they were going to sell initially. So that's really exciting. I'm really, really excited about it.
Have you always been a Tele player, or has that always been your preference?
At least for the last 20 years, yeah. I was just more of a Strat guy as a kid, and then I matured into a Tele player.
You wised up.
Exactly.
So Ibanez came to you. It wasn't you seeking them out.
No, Ibanez came to me.
Was Ibanez a brand or a company that you had used their guitars in the past?
Never. And not because, anything about them bothered me. I'm a very monogamous guitar player. So when I fall in love with a guitar, I'm not that guy who switches around like crazy. I play a guitar all the time. So as a kid, when I got my Stevie Ray Vaughan Strat when I was 12 years old, I played it from 12 until 22, every gig, every minute. And then I got the Tele that my Ibanez is kind of based off of that was made by a guy named Bill Chapin, the black Telecaster.
Right.
And I basically played that 99% of the time for the next 15 years, you know what I mean? And now the Ibanez. And that was, kind of something else that was appealing to me about Ibanez was I knew not only was I getting a new model that would get some attention, I also knew I was going to be very unique on their roster of artists. There's literally nobody like me on their roster. So I thought, man, this is going to get some attention, and it was just so exciting. I was in Japan right around the beginning of the process when we were still kind of talking about it, and like all the heads of the business side of Ibanez in Japan, so older Japanese gentlemen, came to my show and made it clear to me and they didn't speak English very well, but still made it clear to me how excited they were that I was thinking about coming, and how grateful they would be if I joined the team. And then I spoke to some of my friends who are longtime Ibanez endorsers, like Andy Timmons and other guys like that. And there's a reason that Andy Timmons and Schofield and George Benson and Vi and Satch and Paul Gilbert have been with Ibanez for like 30 years, some of them going on 40 years. It's because they're a great company to work for.
That's awesome.
Good people.
I didn't realize they had never made a Tele-style body.
No, never. And I feel very certain saying that my Ibanez currently is the most vintage Ibanez they've ever made, at least going back to when they made lawsuit guitars back in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah.
So as far as you as an artist, when would we expect, or should we expect, the next Josh Smith record?
Well, I've got 2 in the can. It's just a matter of figuring out when I want to release them. That's one of the benefits of having my own studio is I'm always able to work on material. So I have the next one that will come out is something really special that quite honestly has been done for a while, and I haven't released it just because I don't want to mess it up. I'm so proud of it, but it's also quite different from anything I've ever done before. So I want to approach the release in a different way from anything I've done before to kind of go along with it, which means I want to promote it in a different way, get it into different, ears and eyes and avenues than I've ever done before. And I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do that. Because, as an artist, it's very predictable. I know I'm going to put something out. This many people will buy it. I'll maybe make my money back. On to the next. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't want that to happen with this one. I just want to try something different for the sake of treating it differently.
And get it to a new audience.
Yeah, it's quite a different record for me as well. So I think it needs to be treated differently.
And I will say, with technology over the last 10 years, and everything going more digital and social media driven, that's given artists the opportunity to get a fan base globally, not just in the U.S. When you started as an artist, your choice was, well, I want to be an artist, and your fan base was in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And over the years, that's obviously had the chance to progress and grow just due to the internet.
It's mind-blowing.
Yep.
Mind-blowing. Like, to know that if I took my phone out of my pocket right now and posted, hey guys, surprise, I've got a song for sale. It's releasing right now. Here it is. Thousands of people would buy it right now, all over the world.
Right.
That's crazy to me.
Not just the U.S.
It's crazy to me. People are going to buy that guitar. They are buying it all over the world. If I walk in, and it freaks me out, I'll be on the road somewhere. Even like I was joking with Calvin about, and I was in Russia a couple of years ago. I go a lot to Europe and Scandinavia, different places. Sometimes I'll go to countries for the first time I've never been, and I'll walk in a music store. People know who I am when I walk in. Shocking to me. I can't believe that. That's only because of the internet, because of YouTube and Instagram. And I know, it's greatly responsible for the increase in my fan base.
So let's backtrack and talk just a little bit about your history.
Sure.
So you started playing guitar at 6. What led you to guitar?
Well, my parents bought it for me when I was 3 years old. The day my sister was born, in fact. My birthday's October 7th, so this week, and my sister's is the 11th. And my mom went into labor early around my birthday, so my birthday got glossed over because they were having a baby,
Right.
And not that I would have known or been disappointed, but my dad, for some reason, on the day my sister was born, brought me home a guitar and a tennis racket. Literally on the way home from the hospital, the day she was born. He stopped to come get me or see me. I was home with like my grandma or something, and stopped and bought a tennis racket because he loved sports and a guitar and brought them home to his son, and I banged that guitar around for a few years. There's a lot of pictures of me. I carried around a lot around the house. I really liked it. And then when I was 6, I literally said to my parents, hey, I kind of would like to actually learn how to play this thing. Can I take lessons? And that was how it started for me. And I was just hooked like literally from day one.
Now, was it a real guitar or was it like a toy guitar?
It was a real guitar, but a very small guitar. They actually got me a toy guitar when I was 1. I have pictures of that too, one with cowboys and Indians on it.
Nice.
But the one I got when I was 3, I can still play it. It's real short scale acoustic guitar. Right. I have it at my house. In fact, my record Inception, which was my first instrumental record, which I did more than 10 years ago, I started the record with that guitar. I play it. That's the first thing you hear on the record is me playing that guitar.
That's nice. Cool. Yeah. So you started playing guitar at an early age, and obviously you took to it. Mm-hmm. When did you know that, yes, I actually can do this, I want to do this, and then when did you decide this is what I want to do for a living?
Pretty quick. When did I know I could do it? I mean, this is going to sound bad, but teachers started telling me and my parents, something special, like he's really good. He picks things up really fast, especially my time. All the teachers would say something about my time. They'd be like, he's got time like an old jazz musician, like he really has good time, not just like a metronome, like he feels good, he's got pocket. And I didn't know what that meant. And then I remember being in elementary school, and they had a ukulele class in elementary school. And because I was already playing guitar, they made me like the leader of this ukulele class for our concert. And I sat in front of the ukulele class for our concert show, played guitar with the rest of the ukulele ensemble, reading, the charts and stuff, like leading the band. And I kind of realized then, like, I really like this. Then by the time I was 11, I was playing pretty well and improvising, and I was really into blues by then, and I wanted to be playing. Mostly I was obsessed with getting better. I kind of still am. So I was always trying to find a way to push myself to grow, and I kind of reached this point of frustration because anyone my age who played that I knew, any friends or people that I would make friends with my age that played, they were either not as serious about it as I was, so they weren't progressing as fast as I was, or they didn't like the music I liked, because it was heavy metal transitioning into grunge around that time. And that's what kind of forced my hand and my parents to kind of find adults for me to play with. And then that was really the breakthrough, the ceiling moment. Like once I played with adults and realized, oh, I can do this a little bit already. And then I started just obsessing even more, because I lived for the snide looks and the dirty remarks from adults telling me I was doing something wrong. I loved it because it motivated me. All I wanted was people to tell me what I was doing wrong and give me constructive criticism. I was literally hoping every time I got on stage with these guys or went somewhere and played at a jam or whatever, that somebody would teach me something new and I would learn something. And then it just became like a runaway train. I couldn't be stopped. I just wanted to grow as fast as I can. And luckily, people liked it because I was a little kid who was super short with a big guitar. And I know Joe can attest to this. Back then, it was a little more of a novelty to see a little kid play, like really play good. Right. So people go crazy immediately the second you start playing this little kid. And I mean, the second somebody like claps for what you do, come on, that's it. I was hooked.
Hooked. So from an early age, was it always the blues that you were into first, or was it other genres? Or
no, it was the blues always.
And where did that come from?
Twofold. From my parents. Not that they're enormous blues people, but they're enormous music people.
Right.
And my dad has an enormous vinyl record collection. He's a rock and roll guy. But he had a lot of diversity in there. So yes, he had tons of Stones and Allman Brothers and Zeppelin and Hendrix and stuff, but he also had Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis and John Coltrane, like important jazz records, right. Dave Brubeck. And then he had Sam and Dave and Otis Redding, and so I started getting soul too. My mom really liked Motown and Stax and stuff. So I was hearing just great music constantly, because that's what we did in my house. We would listen to records while we watched sports with the sound off, so we'd be listening to music while we watched the game. So I'd be hearing the Stones, but then all of a sudden one day he'd put on Giant Steps, and it's like, what's this? Or he'd put on Sam Cooke. It's, whoa, that knocked me out, or whatever. So I just fell in love with that kind of music, with American music, our history of music,
right.
And so, yeah, it was always kind of that. Not that I didn't listen to heavy metal. That's what all my friends listened to, is what was on MTV every day. It's what I, watched MTV. I had my Warrant records and Slaughter, and I had them. And it wasn't that I didn't dig it, but it was always blues first and rock and roll and jazz and stuff like that.
And a lot of people, like when you read articles or do any kind of, searching on who you are, people always say you're a blues guitarist. But yeah. I personally think you're way more than that. When you go even listen to your catalog of releases, your musical stylings are so different. It's definitely not just blues. I mean, have you tried to reclassify yourself or get out of a pigeonhole of being a blues guitarist, or do you even have an issue with that?
I don't have an issue with it. I consider myself a blues guitarist, quite honestly.
Okay.
Because it's where my center is. It's what I love the most, and I'm always trying to come from a place of there. That being said, I love everything. And the musician I am, I wouldn't be what I am, or the musician I am, without having opened myself up to all the other influences and music. But I feel like it's just made me a stronger blues guitar player. I'm always trying to bring blues to whatever I do as an improviser. But yeah, it's a tough subject, the blues thing, because blues musicians and historians and all that can get in trouble because they don't like to get out of their own way. They've got very set in their ways thoughts about what is and what isn't blues and what's acceptable, and I don't subscribe to any of that.
Right.
But I think where they get lost is they don't realize that it's okay to open yourself up to all this stuff. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're not a blues man anymore, or that you don't respect the blues, or you're cheating on the blues, or any of that stuff. It couldn't be further from the truth, The more music I learn, the better musician I get, the more well-rounded I become. I think that just makes me a better blues musician, because that's where my heart is. But I mean, I get it. You know, people hear me play guitar, they're going to hear me play a lot of things because I play what I hear. I try to play from an honest place. So if I hear something, it's coming from my influences and the things I know and my heart and the things I'm feeling. And to me, that's the definition of an improviser and a definition of a blues musician. Turning off and playing from inside.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Love it. What do you consider your big break, or have you had it yet?
That's a good question, and I'm not quite sure, quite honestly. One thing I'm dealing with at the moment, as over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, I've gotten busier and things have started to relatively grow for me, even just slightly. Sometimes perception doesn't always meet reality. So that's one thing I'm trying to figure out now is how to get to the level and present myself at the level that I think maybe people now associate me as being on when I'm actually technically not really there yet. You know what I mean? At least with the ability to tour or present myself in the way that I would if I had actually reached that level,
Right.
But I think my fan base is starting to grow in a way that they kind of, it's like, it's weird. That's something I'm grappling with at the moment. So I'm so grateful that I'm able to make a living doing any of this. That being said, I've had to diversify myself to extremes to keep things flowing the way
Right.
that they have and to build up the stability that I've built up over the last 20 years since I moved to LA. When I moved to LA, it was, I'm done doing my own thing. I'm just going to go there, play guitar. I'm going to do sessions, and I'm going to go on the road as a sideman. And I basically did that for 10 years.
Right.
And it was really good for me to grow as a musician that way. It was good for stability. It was good financially, but it was a roller coaster too. I mean, the life of that sideman session guy is very up and down.
Yep.
You'll have an incredible year, and then you'll have a year where you literally make no money.
Right.
And luckily, my wife has always been the stable one in our relationship, especially during our first, 10 years in LA. She was our rock. Then things shifted where, as my fan base grew, people started to want more of my thing. So I started to get more requests to go on the road playing my music. I started to put a little more records out and put a little more thought into doing my thing again. And it just kind of snowballed from there. But in all honesty, that's where the least amount of my income comes from,
Sure.
is my music. Most of my income comes from producing records, from things that I lend my name to. So gear, like the Ibanez will be a new thing for that. But other things, the amps, the pedals, things that I'm involved with. Because of my seriousness and my gear obsession, I think I've developed a voice that people know they can trust my opinion. It may not mean that they'll like what I like, but I think they know I'm not bull if I say something about something. It doesn't mean they'll like it. So that's helped. People know this and buy some of the things that I endorse because that's so some of my revenue comes from there. A big part of my revenue comes from like True Fire and other instructional type services that I'm a part of. That does really well for me because I guess people want to learn some of the stuff that I do.
Right.
And I think I'm relatively decent at explaining things and talking about stuff. But I mean, that's just part of it's like I need all those lanes
Right.
just to make it comfortable, and it's still very up and down.
I think one thing that's changed over the last 10, 15 years in the music industry, where when we all got started in this business, you could do one or two things to make a living. Now that everything has went to a more digital industry, everything is streaming. People are paying for access to music versus owning music. That's changed the economy. So obviously everybody's having to diversify and do other things. And you also have a subscription YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, so that's new since the
And
pandemic.
the podcast is new as well, right?
Yeah, that's all. Hey, I'm sitting around at home. What can I do? And that opened my eyes slightly because I had put zero effort into YouTube in the past. I had a channel, but it was, oh, I've got a new album, well, here's a video, or
Right.
whatever. I didn't put anything up there. In fact, it had been almost 4 years since I'd posted a video before the pandemic. And it's been really good, and it's another revenue stream that generates some money for me, not a ton, but it's broadening my fan base again. Definitely, I'm reaching people that I wasn't reaching,
Right.
and then in my other avenues, and it opened my eyes to again the more new lanes of business. Like, if I wanted to, I could honestly turn it into a full-time job, being a YouTuber.
Right.
I don't want to, not at all. It's not happening. But I see the ability there, and it's opened my eyes slightly. Getting back to the beginning of the question, the big break thing, it's like, I don't think it's happened, but I'm not waiting for it either. It's not something I really even believe in. I just work hard and make sure my family's okay and do things that make me happy,
Right.
which is a really lucky thing. Like, if I'm able to mostly do work that I enjoy and be responsible and take care of my family and all that, what more could I ask for?
Right. Absolutely. So once you decided to start into music, you wanted to be an artist, did you ever have a plan B, or was that the plan and that was it?
I've never had a plan B. I've had one day job in my life for a year, about a year. It was when we first moved to LA, because it was a rude awakening for my wife and I. I was 22 years old. Living in Florida was way cheaper than
Right.
living in LA, and I needed to make money. So I got a job for a year testing video games, which couldn't have been a better job for someone who has no other references. And I love video games, and I still hated every second of it. I hated getting up at 7 a.m. every day. I had to take the bus at that time because we only had one car, and my wife would take the car to her job. So I took the bus every day to work. I hated every second of working 9 to 5 and, all that stuff. And it was a fun job, but I still hated it.
You literally had to go into a building to test the video games?
all that. It was a regular job.
No work from home.
But I was playing video games all day.
Right.
But still, it was a job. And if anything, it just even further clarified for me what I'm meant to be doing. And the second I was working enough as a guitar player to quit, I quit.
This could be either you as an artist or maybe even approaching something from the perspective of a producer. What's your creative process? How does music come into your head? I mean, how do you, hey, I want to go write a song, or do you just hear it and you go do it? What is your process, or do you have one?
I have one for after the spark. But the spark is the spark. You know what I mean? So I don't decide normally to write a song. I'm not that guy.
Right.
I wait until I have to write a song because it came to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't decide I need to do this kind of album or that. I wait until something tells me that this is what I'm supposed to do. I crave inspiration, at least in my own work. You know what I mean? I try to do things because I really mean them. That's important to me. As far as producing for other artists, the more I do, which is a lot now, I do have a process for sure. But it changes depending on the goal of the artist, which is the most important thing as a producer.
Right.
Paying attention to what they're actually trying to accomplish and help them get to that goal, and hopefully much better than they even thought it could ever be, But you have to at least help them get to the goal that they already want, I think having worked with producers in the past on other people's records many times just as a guitar player, I would notice when producers were only trying to do what the hell they wanted to do. And it's like, well, isn't this person paying the bills? This artist,
Right.
is their name on the record. And I didn't want to be that kind of producer. So I always try to be cognizant of the artist first and foremost. Of course, I have a vision for the record. The second I get hired to do a project, I've got a vision. Mostly because I can't stop. Once I get onto something, I'm thinking all the time about it because I want to make it as good as possible. But if the artist says something counter to what you're thinking, you got to change. So I think that's as a producer, that's what drives every decision I make.
Serving the artist.
Yeah, it's their project. It's their name.
Yep.
They've got to be proud of it when it's over.
As far as you being a side musician, is that something you feel like you're done with, or do you see that as something you want to move forward and continue doing in addition to being your own artist, in addition to being a producer?
I kind of felt like I was done with it, although literally tomorrow I start rehearsing with Joe to be a sideman for the next 3 months, basically. I kind of made a conscious decision about 7-8 years ago to not do it anymore.
Right.
Number one, not that I don't like being on the road. I love being on the road. But I don't quite like being on the road when it's not for my own thing as much as I used to. Because at this point, I'm very lucky in that I've seen a lot of the world. So it's not like a giant, not that I don't love going places and eating at restaurants in every city and in the world and all. I love it all. I love every second of it. But it's not all new to me anymore like it was, Right. So when I'm on the road, I want it to be for me now. Because it is a grind, and I think people don't realize that when they look at it from the outside. And not that I'm old, but the older I get, the more of a grind it is every year. So I made a choice of like, hey, if I'm going to go on the road, I want it to be because it really means a lot to me. It's my thing, and I'm building something here. So yeah, in the last 7 years, I've actually turned down lots of work as a sideman, some that would have been quite substantial as far as pay goes. But I would have had to pause on things that I was doing. I would have had to literally cancel tours that I had booked under my own name to do some of these things that I've turned down. And that wasn't an option for me. I was too much into this, invested into trying to do what I'm doing and, being happy and all that. So I would never say never, that I wouldn't do it, but I can't see myself spending a year on the road with somebody else. Like even this Joe thing. Honestly, I'm doing it because he's my friend and it'll be fun and I love to be on the road with but I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't coming out of COVID. I'm doing it because I haven't been on the road in 2 years.
Right.
And it'll just be nice to be on the road and play as much as we're going to play for the next 3 months. It's too cyclical, the sideman thing. Like I said earlier, when you get a great gig as a sideman, it's like, oh my God, the world is your oyster. Everything's great. You go on the road for 3 months and you make a ton of money. And you stay in fancy hotels, and you come home, and before you even realize it, 6 months could go by before you even get a phone call for something else.
Right.
And that was my life for years, and I don't want to go back to that type of thing. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I understand. What's some advice that's been given to you that has stuck with you your whole career?
A few things. Some not necessarily advice, but just observations that I made from watching Heroes. One would be the time that I got to spend around B.B. King when I was really young and seeing how kind he was to everybody and how he made everyone feel special, and he was always in a good mood and made time for whoever wanted to have a minute of his time. Right. That was really important for me as a kid to see that, because I was like, this is the king of the blues. He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do, and he couldn't have been a nicer person and been more accommodating and sometimes overly, so that was eye-opening. As far as advice, like as a musician, the best advice I was ever given was as a kid being told, don't ever throw away any performance or solo or moment in a set. And especially solo, because I'm an improviser, so that's what I do a lot of the night. I'm soloing, And don't ever treat any of them, even if it's 4 bars worth of you're improvising or doing something, like it doesn't matter. Every moment matters. When I sit down on my couch at home by myself and I'm playing, I'm always kind of playing with a purpose. I don't just noodle. I'm not that guy. And I try to treat every gig and every moment like that, like, hey, this means something. I respect it a lot, and I try to treat them all like they're moments and they're important. Somebody may enjoy it. Somebody's listening. Or, hey, just enjoy it yourself. Respect the fact that it's making you smile and do this. And, so that was the best advice I got, because it kept me level-headed and just always playing music for the right reasons, I think, which is just because it's so awesome to play music. It's the greatest thing ever.
So throughout your career, especially when you were starting out, you got to open up and play for a lot of people, B.B. King being one of them,
Yeah.
Jimmy Thackeray,
Yeah.
Lucky Peterson, who
Rest
I
in peace.
love. Lucky Peterson, who was probably your favorite artist that you got to open up or play with, not even necessarily open up with. Who's your favorite artist you got to play
I
with?
was really lucky as a kid, like Joe was. You know, it was a curiosity factor a lot of times when artists would come down to Florida and they would hear about this kid, you know. So a lot of times you would get that, hey, come sit in, you know, and they want to see what you can do and, you know, all that. But for me, it was just like a blessing. I mean, I got to play with, Jimmy Thackeray, you know, who's a good friend, but I mean, I got to play with Matt Guitar Murphy. You know, I got to play with
Wow.
Coco Taylor. I got to play with Junior Walker. Not only did I play with Junior Walker in the All-Stars, I played shotgun with Junior Walker in the All-Stars when I was like 12 years old. All sorts of people like that. Lucky Peterson and Kenny Neal and Larry McCrae. You know, Larry was incredibly kind to me as a kid. And I would always recognize those people, those moments as being special. I was taking it all in and kind of learning. Thackeray was important for me because he treated me right away not like a kid. I think he saw how serious I was about it, and maybe he saw, hey, this guy's going to be good. Like, he's not just a flash in the pan. And so he always treated me like an adult and kind of like a peer. And he'd give me shit. He'd rib me a little bit, you know, and I had a lot of fun playing with him. Also, I think he's one of the most underrated blues guitar players of the last 30 years. And if you don't know Jimmy Thackeray, go back and listen to some of the original Nighthawks records and also listen to some of Jimmy's trio records, Jimmy Thackeray and the Drivers, and more recent stuff. But, I mean, if you listen to the Nighthawks, 1980, 1981, 82, this is before Stevie Ray, Texas Flood came out, you know, pre the boom of the 80s blues, pre the Fabulous Thunderbirds even records coming out. Jimmy's playing like that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think he's one of the most, not overlooked, but underrated, underappreciated guys. He meant a lot to me as a kid. It still does.
It's awesome. So now we're going to enter into the part of the podcast called It's Gonna Be Great.
All right.
That is our slogan here at Ocean Way.
Nice.
So I have 4 simple questions,
Okay.
not necessarily a simple answer.
Sure.
What's the greatest concert you've ever been to and why?
Kenny Garrett with his classic trio back in the early 2000s. It was Kenny Garrett with Kenny Kirkland on keyboard, piano, who passed away, greatest piano player I ever saw. Nat Reeves on bass and Jeff Tain Watts on drums. For jazz fans, they'll know, but if you don't know, this was an incredibly classic lineup for, you know, my childhood era. They were the cream of the crop at the time. In my opinion, Kenny Garrett is still the cream of the crop, but he was putting out records that rival classic 50s and 60s records at the time, and that band was unparalleled at the moment. And I saw improvisation on a level that I didn't know existed when I saw that show. It made me a Kenny Garrett fan for life. I'm a massive Kenny Garrett fan. He's my favorite improviser. That show changed my life, and I've seen Kenny Garrett since 50 times, you know, but getting to see him one time with that band was really special.
Nice. I'm going to have to actually go look him up. I don't know who he is.
He's an alto sax player. He played with Miles Davis towards
Okay.
the end of Miles' life, and then he started a solo career after Miles passed. He's incredibly great.
Wow. In your opinion, what's the greatest record of all time and why?
Complete record? Axis Bold as Love, Jimi Hendrix. I just think it's short and sweet and perfect. It flows in a really special way. Don't get me wrong, I love Are You Experienced? I love Electric Ladyland. I love Band of the Gypsies, but Axis has always been really special for me. I've probably listened to it 1,000 times as a kid. Something about it just was always, I couldn't believe this record. Like, as far as just like the most perfect recording ever, song, to me, Sam Cooke, Change Is Gonna Come, is the greatest thing ever recorded on wax in the history of the universe. It doesn't matter how many thousands of times I've listened to it, it makes the hair stand up on my arms every time. and I hear something different in the arrangement every time, especially as I become a better musician and understand now more about strings and horns and orchestra arrangement and record production. The record is a masterpiece. I don't think there's ever been a song produced as well that also is as important culturally and what it means and all that, and the time it was released, and also sung that beauty. I think it's the greatest thing ever recorded.
I had this conversation with Eric Gales about his new record. There was a couple of songs on that project that y'all did that was very similar in style and even impact as far as change is going to come.
Yeah, well, Eric, okay, to backtrack, we wrote a lot of that record right during the beginning of COVID, which also was right after George Floyd got killed, and things were, at a crazy place in our nation. So Eric had a lot to say, and Joe's a smart guy. So we were in my studio, the three of us, in L.A. We were doing pre-production for the record, kind of deciding on how we want the record to go, what tunes we might do. Everybody was showing each other Joe had written some tunes, I had written some tunes, Eric brought some tunes. Here, let's do this and this and this. And then we were just literally George Floyd had just gotten killed like the day before that. And then, riots started happening and stuff. And so we just were having a candid conversation, mostly Eric and myself, just talking about the state of the world. And Joe just hit record on his phone to Eric and I's probably hour-long, pretty heavy conversation about the world, and then went home and transcribed it and pulled out a lot of things that we said from the conversation. And then we wrote songs kind of around those titles and ideas and things Eric were saying, things Eric wanted to say.
Right.
And I think that's what makes the record so good, besides how great Eric is and the performance and all the work that we did on the production and the arrangements, all that. The message of the record, too, I think is very strong for what's going on in the world today. I'm really proud of it. I can't wait for people to hear it. I've known Eric 20-plus years. and I've been listening to him since I was a kid. I've told him, many times. I had his picture on my wall in my bedroom because he was someone, he's a little older than Joe and I. He was someone, who got a record deal as a kid, and Joe and I could look at him and go like, yep, we could do it. So I had that on my wall. Like, look, He loves Stevie Ray Vaughan. He plays blues-based rock and roll. He's a kid. Look at him. He's serious. He's on a major label, In the back of my mind when I started producing records, even, before I started working with Joe, on my list was I would like to produce a record for Eric because I felt like he had more to say than he'd ever said on any of his records.
Absolutely.
And I also felt like he could just make better records than he's ever made. Not that I don't like his records, just I felt there was a record there that hadn't been made yet by him that needed to be done on a certain level. So then when it became a thing and we really did it, and I know Joe feels the same way, we were incredibly determined to make it as good as we possibly could. I know Joe, I've heard Joe say it already in interviews, we worked harder on that record, and I don't mean because it was hard, I mean because we wanted to, than we do on our own records. I know Joe put more effort into that, like he wanted it to be great so badly, because we love Eric so much, and he means a lot to us. And so we just wanted to make the best possible record we could for him. So I can't wait for people to hear it.
Eric and I had that very same conversation on the podcast, talking about the making of the record, everything that went into it, and even came up, I think Eric even mentioned, Sam Cooke, A Change Is Gonna Come.
Yeah.
That was a lot, that was just the mood on some of those songs, but I've not felt that on probably any record since A Change Is Gonna Come has come out.
Wow. Well, that's cool of you to say that. I didn't even think of it in terms of a change. Change Is Gonna Come has been like on this pedestal for me since I was a kid. I remember hearing it and just being like almost knocked over. Like, what is that? I'm Sam Cooke, I'm a guitar player, so Sam is not a guitar player, but when people ask me like, who's your favorite artist? Sam Cooke is my favorite. Like there's something special about Sam Cooke to me, that I don't think anybody has ever been so perfect and yet still so soulful.
Right.
It's a really hard thing to do, to reach the top of your craft and be technically as excellent as Sam was, because he was unbelievable, and also still feel and sound like you're coming from a pure place of
Right.
just nothing but heart and soul. So as a kid, it was like, I just want to try to be like that. I want to get as good as I can, but still sound like I mean it and play the blues. And honestly, in some ways, it's one of my biggest influences is just that level of trying to reach an unattainable level of what he reached,
Right.
Just as an artist in general, no matter what you play or do.
I think the song Eric brought up, A Change Is Gonna Come, was we were talking about stand-up.
Stand Up, yeah. So Kev Moe wrote that song,
Yep.
Stand Up, based on an idea that came from our conversation, Eric and I's conversation. Joe had written Stand Up on a sheet of paper along a list of titles and
Right.
things, ideas from that conversation. And Joe was here in Nashville and got together with Keb, and Keb wrote that song. And it's just a great song.
But I'm happy for Eric, happy for you and Joe on that record. I think it's hopefully going to be great for everyone involved.
I hope so, too.
It's definitely an amazing project. A couple other questions. Who is the greatest artist in your opinion, and why?
Okay, well,
You might
Sam
have
is
just- you
Sam
might have
is-
just answered
Sam
it.
is my favorite.
Right.
But greatest is such a subjective term. Maybe like the greatest, just like complete freak of nature, unparalleled level of genius and creativity. I mean, maybe Stevie Wonder. There's not many that can really approach what Stevie accomplished. That's just the scope of unreal music that this guy made. So he's up there for me. Ray Charles, equally as important and genius, changed the face of music in his time, a lot like Sam. Also, Ray and Sam were the first like true businessmen of their generation, owned their own music, started record labels, all that type of stuff. In guitar, BB is my biggest hero without question, but nobody hits me like Albert King, and no one ever will on any musical level. Like Albert King, when he's taking a solo, hits me unlike anything ever does. It audibly makes me react when I listen to Albert King. I can't help but just go, oh, man, oh. Like I just listen to it and feel it. So, yeah. And then I, honestly, Hendrix too. Hendrix is equally as great and genius and important to the history of music, and certainly as important to the history of the instrument that I love. I would say arguably the most important in the history of our instrument, as
Right.
far as certainly the biggest sea change in the history of our instrument. He changed things more than anybody else, I think.
I would agree. Last question. If there was anybody you could work with, who would be the greatest artist that you would like to work with, if you could?
It's difficult because a lot of the ones I would say are passed away, So of living guys, or gals, ladies, women, that's a really tough one. I have musicians that I want to play with, track with, work with, hire, things like that. So some of those things are more important to me. Like, people I want to sit down and play with, Willie Weeks on bass one time before it's
Right.
too late. I want to play with, Steve Gadd before it's too late. Guys like that mean a lot to me. That list could be never ending. But
Right.
As far as like just someone I'd want to make a record for or with, dream project, I'd really like to make a record for Robert Cray. I'm a massive Robert Cray fan. And there's a record I have had in my head for him. I do this. I just have in my head.
the
I have a
perfect
thing.
studio where you could do that at.
In my head, I have this. A lot of artists. I have a record that
Yeah.
I want them to make selfishly. I'd like to try to do some of those with some of these artists. Different artists. Like for me, it would have been. I mean, she's gone, but like I would have like killed somebody to work with Aretha or something like that. We work with Sam sings on Reese's record, Sam Moore
Right.
from Sam and Dave. That was crazy. I'd love to make a record with him, a full record before it's too late, guys like that. There's a guy, James Gadsden, a drummer in Los Angeles, a legend, one of the greatest drummers of all time, also a great singer and writer, important person, great friend of mine in Los Angeles who I played with a lot. I want to make his solo record before it's too late. You know, he's never made a solo record. I'm actually trying to convince Joe of that one right now. Like, hey, can we make this record before we can't? A lot of little things like that I think are important. But I don't know that there's one just like, dream one that I have to make. Yeah.
Robert Cray would be awesome.
Joe and I have talked about it. I don't know how if he'd even be interested,
Right. So, Josh, thank you for being on the It's Going to Be Great podcast.
Thank you, man.
We love having you at the studio. Thank you for taking time out of your day. You literally came in and did your podcast after doing an all-day session, so we totally appreciate it. If there's ever anything we can do for you, let us know. Absolutely, man.
Always such a pleasure to be here at Ocean Way. I love it. Definitely my home in Nashville when it comes to working, and nowhere else I'd rather be. And happy to do this anytime. Yeah.
Thank you very much.